Guys, this morning we're about to have a number of interesting conversations, but first we want to start off with the conversation on the topic of TADCO. And before we get into that conversation, I have a quick clip that I want to bring to you, and we'll be back.
Your pronouncement on TADCO, let me make it clear, me never formed TADCO. Is a man who's walking with white boots that formed TADCO and take everybody who wasn't functioning, as you say, and lump them in one company called TADCO. And so you're making the point that we took the people, when I say we are talking about the THA, not me, the THA took the people who were non-functional or bad workers and just lump them in a new entity hoping that they will perform. And you're saying that they're not performing better now and that there is a need for restructuring. Restructuring TADCO will mean that several of those people you talk about will no longer be in TADCO. And if they're no longer in TADCO, it means they're looking for a job somewhere. You understand where I'm going with it? And then when they start to make noise about fire people, you restructure, I don't see half of all you're commenting and supporting and saying that we're right to do the restructuring. But once you know, and I agree with you, there's a need for some restructuring in TADCO. Yeah, there's a need for restructuring in TADCO when it is you're going to have products coming to be sold in TADCO and half of it unaccounted for. Cheese missing, ham missing, all kind of things missing. So there's a need for restructuring that has to happen. But note that the restructuring will result in a leaner, much more efficient TADCO that can work for you. Mr. Rajman, you want to see Tobago as a prime.
Okay, guys, and that clip that you just saw is a clip from one of the town hall meetings that was held at Mount St. George on Tuesday. This morning, to further this conversation, I have the privilege of sitting with our former Chief Secretary and the political leader for the Tobago Council of the PNM, Mr. Ancil Dennis. Good morning.
Good morning to you. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me say good morning to listeners and viewers of this very interesting program.
Well, it's always a pleasure. And this one, we're going to get into some very interesting conversation. And as you saw by the lead-in of that clip, we're talking a bit about TADCO, which the current Chief Secretary insinuated. He said that that wasn't formed by their administration, which we know it was formed by the previous administration. But he made it a critical point that it was, when referring to the man in the white boots, we know that you put on your white boots and you went out there, you were out there with the farmers during your time in office. So it is only safe to assume that he meant you when he spoke about the man with the white boots. So you played an instrumental role in the formation of TADCO. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of TADCO and what the vision and mission really was in the beginning. And do you still see TADCO reaching for the initial vision that you presented when the company was formed?
Well, firstly, let me say that I'm thankful that the Chief Secretary gave credit to the previous PNM administration for TADCO. And I'm hoping that he continues to give the PNM credit for initiatives and programs started under the PNM and even delivered by the PNM that the people of Tobago are now benefiting from. TADCO, of course, was really an amalgamation of three companies. We had the fishing company, we had TADCO Suave, and we had the cassava company. Of course, those companies were operating and functioning reasonably well, but we recognized that there was room for improvement and that we could have benefited from greater efficiency by bringing all three entities under one umbrella. So, of course, we went about that restructuring without firing or sending home anybody. We made a determination that in that arrangement, we were going to save all the jobs. So every staff member in the companies at that time across the three companies found a place in TADCO. And the mandate was simply to ensure that we improve productivity in the agri sector, that we improve efficiency, and most importantly, that we get Tobago produced goods not only across the country, but even outside of our shores, regionally, internationally, etc. And therefore, the company was established with that mandate in mind. And I think we started off very well. We had intentions of establishing an agro-processing facility in Goldsboro. That was started. The equipment was brought in from China. The equipment is in Tobago as I speak, somewhere in Shore Park. But unfortunately, the building is there languishing up at Goldsboro. In addition to that, we got the capital of Paradise up and running. I see this administration is taking credit for that. But the truth is, by the time this administration came into office, the capital of Paradise was pretty much ready to take the seas again. In addition to that, across the sector, we were doing a number of things. We started a farmland development program, again with the intention of putting acres of lands into the hands of farmers in Friendship, in Goldsboro, in Belmont Road, in Lamy Road, and other areas across Tobago, because we believe that through that arrangement, farmers would produce more. And TADCO will have the opportunity to take those goods from the farmers and do the necessary agro-processing and stuff to get food items to feed ourselves, to feed the nation, and as I said before, the region, and possibly the world. Unfortunately, I think TADCO has lost its moorings. TADCO is now on a new path that is detrimental to the people of Tobago. And I will start even with the food hub. We were in the process, when we were in office, of establishing a farmers' wholesale market, right? They decided, based on their information and based on their knowledge, or perhaps based on advice, that they will establish a food hub. And we now see a situation where TADCO is somehow becoming a new festivals commission. We are seeing events, we are seeing all fours and all these kinds of things. Meanwhile, the farmers are not necessarily benefiting from TADCO as they should. The Goldsboro facility is not being continued. We see now where some company from Trinidad by the name of Novo is engaged now doing exactly what that facility was being established to do at a cost to the taxpayer of $300,000 per month.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. When you say what that facility was supposed to do, are you talking about the one that you guys were
that we started
working on
in Goldsboro? Yes, correct. Okay. And that the equipment, the same equipment Novo has, that same equipment is owned by the THA, and it's in some facility here in Tobago, unused and unutilized to the benefit of Tobagonians. So this administration has chosen to engage Novo at a cost of $300,000 per month. And this wasn't first raised by me, it was raised by an avid, serious Tobago farmer who came to this very platform, or it might have been Tobago Channel 5, to reveal that to the public. Initially, TADCO was saying his lie, right? The chairman and I think another director came to the media and refuted those claims, claiming that the farmer was lying. Until recently, I got my hands on some invoices, because of course, no company is crazy enough to send an invoice to the THA without producing anything for the invoice. So I got my hand on invoices, and then the chairman came afterwards sometime last week and said, well, TADCO Novo was not paid. TADCO didn't pay any money to Novo. But that is not the question, because of course we know that the THA doesn't pay immediately. It's always an arrangement where invoice submitted and payment comes sometime after that. So it's not whether or not Novo was paid. The issue is whether or not Novo is engaged by the THA to produce items already being produced in Tobago at a cost of $300,000 per month. The chief secretary defended that arrangement when he stated, in the most difficult way for me to understand, that Novo is being paid to take goods from farmers in Tobago, take it back to Trinidad, process it, and bring it back to Tobago. That is a lie, because when you ask the farmers across Tobago, no farmer could tell me confidently that TADCO engages in taking any produce from them. As a matter of fact, all of them are saying that since we left office, where we were taking goods from the farmers, mostly to produce food support for Tobagonians during the difficult pandemic period. Since we left office, that arrangement has stopped. So my question is, which farmers exactly are they taking the produce from? Because none of the farmers that I spoke to, and I have built relationships with most, I'm not saying all, but most of the farmers through Walking Tobago in the same white boots that the Chief Secretary mentioned.
Right.
So is it that the Chief Secretary is lying to the public? The chairman of TADCO is saying that Novo wasn't paid. That's not the issue. And now the Chief Secretary is claiming, well, yes, we engaged Novo, but they're taking produce from Tobago to take it back to Trinidad for processing and then bring it to Tobago.
Right. Unfortunately for me, I was the one that had those conversations with Mr. Roland Murray when he came on,
Right.
and he brought the food box initiative to the public and spoke about the fact that the items in the food box were being produced by the very same Novo farms that you're talking about. And after that, subsequent to that, I had the chairman, Mr. Alfred, as well as Mr. Dillon came on, and they did admit to having that relationship with Nouveau Farms. And I did ask the question whether or not the produce was coming from Tobago, and Mr. Dillon would have indicated that it was a combined initiative whereby they were taking items from farmers in Tobago, but they were also taking items from the very same Nouveau Farms. And I have to ask you the question, how do you think the processing can happen in Tobago if that facility is not ready?
Again, we were making the steps, right? And we, in our arrangement, we took goods from the farmers in Tobago, and we were able to produce food items with the same goods. So to say now that farmers in Tobago aren't producing enough, as I heard the Chief Secretary say, is a lie. Now, the thing is, the previous administration started a facility, and they will have the documents from the previous company board. The documents will rest with the CEO as to the purpose of that facility. And again, it is to do exactly what Novo is doing, or what they are paying Novo to do.
The question lies, what type of transitional programs or sessions you had with this, or your administration would have had with this current administration? Because it seemed to me from that conversation that I had with Mr. Alfred, who's the chairman of TADCO, and Mr. Dillon, that they had no idea about the intricate details surrounding the creation of that facility. Because if you remember, they walked the facility, they took the media on a tour, and they showed what the status of the facility currently is.
And that is quite unfortunate. It is true that there was no proper handing over, not only with TADCO, but perhaps across all the other entities. Because when the Chief Secretary could get on the media and essentially fire all the boards, right, with immediate effect, then obviously there will be no proper handing over. I am told, I don't know if the information is correct, I am told that people barged into offices, removed people from offices, changed the wrong offices, went to the police and stuff concerning not being able to find documents without even a phone call to the previous chairman of the company. Again, that is what I'm being told. I cannot verify if that is the truth, right? But clearly there was no plan to have any proper handing over. I think people were more interested in getting the previous administration out, because as far as they were concerned that all of us were thieves, and people were more interested in getting people out and looking for information to take to the police and that kind of thing, rather than getting on with the business of the people of Tobago.
Right, and as you speak about the business of the people of Tobago and in the interest of Tobago's development outside of the politics, do you think there's still an opening to have those conversations to ensure that these things come to fruition? Because as you indicated,
of course,
the relationship with Nouveau is one that is being had because we currently do not have the processing facilities here on the island to facilitate the type of production that is necessary.
I'm not buying that, because I'm saying even if you must have a relationship with Nouveau, the fact remains that produce that is being produced in Tobago, I went to Goldsboro last week and I saw some of the very produce that appeared on that invoice in the ground in Goldsboro here in Tobago. And therefore it cannot be that produce is being taken from Trinidad to bring to Tobago, especially produce that is being produced in Tobago. That is simply unacceptable. And it's not in the interest of Tobagonians. Now, I heard as well the Chief Secretary claiming that Tobago farmers were not producing due to floods. And the question I have is, between Trinidad and Tobago, where floods the most? All right? So it is simply unacceptable. Now, to the point of having open conversations, of course it can happen. There's nothing wrong with the chairman of TADCO picking up his phone and calling Ms. Titus to get the information. Even as it relates to TPAC, I know TPAC is not the conversation, but there was a board member having to call me to get some information as to the status and the mandate and the purpose and that kind of stuff concerning TPAC, simply because, again, the previous board was unceremoniously removed. I am told up to this day they have not been paid all their board fees. Some of it is still owing, and there is no answer or response from anybody. So when you treat people like that, and when you set that kind of tone, then there is no real opportunity for a proper handing over and for continuity. So while I would believe that this administration is clearly on a different path because they are making different decisions, which I understand, different administrations will have different policies. So instead of continuing the facility at Goldsboro and utilizing the equipment that was already purchased, they choose to engage Novo at a cost of $300,000 a month to bring goods from Trinidad to Tobago. They choose to carry the media to an unfinished building in some effort to maybe embarrass the previous administration. They chose as well to put a food hub in Shore Park instead of continuing with the farmers' wholesale market. So they are clearly on a different path. But at the same time, I think conversations can be had with the people who were there previously to get information if that is required.
And do you think that, because admittedly, there isn't the capacity in Tobago as yet?
No, I'm not admitting that Tobago lacks capacity in the agriculture sector.
I'm speaking in regards to the production.
In terms of agro-processing?
Exactly.
Well, the reality is, before we started that facility, and even before there was any Novo, we did engage in some kind of agro-processing. There are people doing it separate and apart from the THA outside in their own little corners and stuff. I've seen it myself, so it is happening. But when you spend $300,000 per month, and it might be more, I'm saying that money could have gone into finishing the current facility rather than have it there unmaintained. The only time they cut the bush was when they wanted to bring in the media in an attempt to embarrass us. But I'm saying the resources can go into the completion of that facility, or the resources can even go into the pockets of Tobago farmers, right? So that we can have a situation, because a secretary said it when he wasn't in office as yet, that when you take Tobago's money and you put it into the pockets of Trinidadians or into another economy, and let me just say this as well, I am not saying that no Trinidadian or no Trinidad company should do business in Tobago. That is not what I'm saying. If the capacity and if what is being produced can be done in Tobago, then it should not come from Trinidad. And that is what I'm simply saying. So I'm saying that money could be utilized in the interest of Tobagonians rather than to ship into another company that will not benefit Tobagonians.
So are you saying that the current production should be stalled until that building is completed? Because there is a certain level of quality and consistency that comes from engaging
the chief secretary himself did say last night that they would relook the situation, they would relook the process. Because again,
the structure of TADCO, that is.
Not just the structure of TADCO, he did indicate about looking at the Novo arrangement again. And if I'm not mistaken, he didn't indicate that it's on a pause or something like that. But my information is that they owe Novo money, and Novo has stopped producing because of the money being owed. right? So I am saying agro-processing and production can happen in Tobago. And even if you feel, which I don't agree with, even if you feel that you must engage this company from Trinidad via MOU, and up to now we have not seen the MOU. This administration has a habit where Tobagonians only find out things if the minority leader reveals it, or if some document is leaked to me and I put it out there. We have not seen the MOU as well, although we have been asking for it. But even if they agree that we must engage Novo in order to save Tobago's agriculture sector, then at least if the items that Novo requires are being produced in Tobago, then it should come from the farmers in Tobago. And my information is that apart from meats and bread, everything else comes from Trinidad, although it is being produced in Tobago.
Okay, and so a lot of the conversation that has been had from yourself and the minority leader on your side has surrounded the notion of the THA giving Tobago's money to Trinidad contractors. However, a number of the contracts that were distributed during your time in office went to Trinidadians, especially the one for the Scarborough Market renovation project that went to a Trinidadian contractor. So is that not some level of...
I'm glad you asked the question, because it gives me an opportunity to explain the significant difference. Now, again, we are not saying, and I am not saying, that no Trinidad company should do work in Tobago. You have, in the public sector, there are several ways in which you could tender projects. You can have open tender. Yeah? In an open tender, it goes out into the public domain, and any company registered with the THA, whether they're from Trinidad or Tobago, can tender for that project. And that's the most transparent form of tendering, and anybody could win that project. And I can assure you that on every occasion where a Trinidad company was awarded work under the PNM, unless it was a case where some special skill was required that did not exist in Tobago, on every other occasion it was an open tender, right? Where it was advertised by one of the agencies that were doing work for us, sometimes MTS, sometimes it was UDCOT, and there's another one, NIPDEC, right? On every occasion it was an open tender. Again, let me repeat, unless it was some special skill that was required that did not exist in Tobago. This administration, on the other hand, has selected a group of contractors. Well, it's not even a group. Perhaps it has belonged to one or two from Trinidad, brought them to Tobago, and are sole selecting them. So in other words, they were handpicked, no tendering process. Another road started. Tobagonians didn't even know that the road started until some resident down there chose to lie down in the road because of some incursion concerning his land. We were not told that a road was going to start. We were not told about the costs. We were not told about who the contractor was until 8 days after it started. We saw no advertisement for that project. So no other contractor, whether from Trinidad or Tobago, was given an opportunity to tender for that project, because it was not a public tender, it was a selective arrangement. And there's a stark difference. So when you come and you handpick these contractors to bring them to do work in Tobago, that can be done, and were being done by Tobago contractors who, by the way, were employing more than 1,000 Tobagonians who are now unemployed, then you can understand the situation that creates in the Tobago economy. So don't put the PNM in that bracket at all. Again, let me reiterate, yes, Trinidad contractors got work under the PNM. Yes, Tobago will always have to utilize Trinidad contractors at some point, right, going forward in our development. But it cannot be a situation where you handpick contractors, sole select them, and bring them to do work in Tobago that were previously being done by Tobagonians. If you put it out publicly, and a Trinidad contractor tender, and they win the award, no problem. But in this case, we have between the Chief Secretary and the Secretary and whoever else in the Division of Infrastructure colluding to select chosen contractors. And if you realize, the one doing the road down at Friendship is the same one that did the road in Dutch Fort under very questionable circumstances, which I will not repeat because it was already revealed on this very platform. I think it was through the Minority Report. So there's a stark difference there. Don't compare the PNM to this administration.
Excellent. And so, as we wrap up this morning's conversation, because unfortunately we're out of time, I really wish that we had the entire hour to discuss. However, we don't. Is there any messages that you want to send to this current administration before you leave?
What will I say to this current administration? They don't normally take advice, according to their own advisor, Mr. Ho Choi Charles, and Tobago economist Vanos James, who supported them, by the way. If they're not listening to Ho Choi and Vanos, then I'm not sure what I could possibly tell them, but I would want to tell them to change course, evaluate the current circumstances. The path that they are pursuing is detrimental to Tobago and Tobago's economy. And I will really want to caution and advise them to change course, not only with Novo, but even the current circumstances in the division of infrastructure. Though I believe the chief secretary has very little power when it comes to that division, and even among other things, really evaluate the circumstances and change course before it's too late.
All right, thank you for that word of advice. All right, thank you so much for taking the time out to sit here with us, guys. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back right after this.